Yes, hello. It's Jason Lube. How's it going? Welcome back to the Ultra Culture Podcast, episode number 72. My guest today is one of the very first repeat guests on the show. It's your friend and mine, Mickey Pellerano, who was actually on the show a few years ago, but has returned, thankfully, and we had an awesome 2-hour or so conversation on magic and astrology and the use of astrology for magic, which is something that I don't know a whole lot about, but he knows a ton about and has a super enlightened and unexpected and interesting perspective to share on it from his work as a professional astrologer working with all kinds of people on, real life stuff, working through difficult life transitions and things like that. So he is awesome. Let me read you a little bit. I'll just read you his bio from his website, which is mickeypellerano.com. Let's see. Mickey Pellerano is a Cuban-American artist and occult scholar. His work combines elements of drawing, painting, film, performance, and ritual derived from both Eastern and Western esotericism. He maintains a reputed practice in astrology, as well as frequent writings, workshops, and presentations on artistic and metaphysical topics. Pellerano has presented at institutions such as MoMA, MoMA PS1, Serpentine UK, the Geffen Contemporary Los Angeles, the Brooklyn Museum, the Museum of Art and Design NYC, the Warhol Museum, ISCP Brooklyn, Mira Barcelona, ICA Philadelphia, and the 2019 Venice Biennial. His work has also been influential in music through his various contributions to album art and music video for such record labels as Sub Pop, Cranky, and Sacred Bones. Featured publications include the New York Times, Art Forum, Vice Magazine, Bomb Magazine, Zing Magazine, Hyperallergic, K48, Straight to Hell, as well as Disinformation. Hey, that was Generation Hex, the book we worked on together that he contributed to way back when, and printed matter anthologies. Digital appearances include Ultra Culture. Hey, hang on, that's also me. SF MoMA's Raw Material and Beyond Reality podcasts. Pellerano graduated from NYU's Tisch School of the Arts Experimental Theater Wing in 2003. He began his thoroughgoing study and practice of occultism in 2002 and received initiation into a formal Hermetic order in 2014. He lives and works in Brooklyn, New York. Awesome. You may also know him from his new project, which we talk about a little bit at the beginning of this episode, Time Lord TV, which is a video interview kind of variety show where he interviews musicians and occult people, and it's pretty awesome. So we talk about that. Definitely check that out too. All right. So with that introduction, I think I need say no more, and I will just get straight into the interview. Although I should say also, Memorial Day is coming up, and I'm going to have some goodies for you. I will keep my lips sealed for now, but one of them, which I will tell you about right now, is that we are going to have another Magic.me World Summit. So you may remember we had a World Summit last November, which kind of turned into this massive I think hundreds of people showed up for it, and it was kind of like a Zoom rave. So it's basically exactly like a rave, except no dancing, no sweating, no drugs, no getting raided by the cops at 4 a.m, which unfortunately, all those things are fun. We can't really do them on the internet, but we did the Zoom rave, which is people talking to each other on the computer. Okay, so not exactly the same, but the core element there, human connection across every imaginable border, national, transnational borders, gender, orientation, background, race, everything. People were coming together and talking about the thing they love, magic. We all love magic. It's fun and cool and makes you smart and makes you an empathic and compassionate person. And it was awesome last time. I mean, people were just opening up and talking and sharing tips and tricks. And I was kind of in and out and, doing my spiel, but I pretty much stayed out of the way and let people just hang out and do their thing. And I just kind of subtracted my personality from the whole thing. You've got lots of me talking at you on podcasts and office hours and courses and things like that. I don't always need to do that. I'm actually happiest when I step aside and let students do their thing. And it was a really, really great experience. And we're doing it again on Monday, Memorial Day, May 31st. So you probably have, the day off work, or maybe you don't work, or maybe you work from home and you can kind of have it on in the background. Don't get in trouble, but, people do that. So check it out. It's going to be available for everyone who is a subscriber to Magic.me. That includes any product, monthly, yearly, or if you just took one course or a mega course or any of that. Anyone who is a paid student of Magic.me will have access. So jump in. If you're not already a paid subscriber, there's a billion reasons why you should become one. And I've said many, many of them on the show. And so I won't belabor the point. We have every class imaginable under the sun on Magic, live office hours. The list of benefits and awesomeness goes on and on and on. And of course, you can see them at magic.me, magick.me. But I think you've heard me talk about this already. So, hey, if you want to join in the World Summit, the 2021 World Summit on Memorial Day, then subscribe and you'll be getting an email or purchase any course. You'll be getting an email from me on Monday with the login info. It starts at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time and goes long. Goes probably until late at night. And I don't want to promise ahead of time, but last time we ended up extending it several days. We'll see how that goes this year because it would extend into the working week, but we'll see. We'll have to see what the demand is. But definitely all Monday and Monday night, it's going to be happening. All right, my dears. I can't wait to see you in the 2021 Magic.me World Summit upon the digital Mount Olympus, where the Olympian gods, that's you, get to meet and converse and hang out and do all this, do your crazy magic stuff. I know about what it is you kids do. All right, I will see you then. See you there. And in the meantime, here's Mickey Pellerano. So, what's up?
Hi, Jason.
What's up? Welcome back. You're one of the only people to be on the show twice so far. So,
oh, really?
Of course. Yeah, perhaps the first person. Yeah, so
wow.
Welcome back.
Thank you. When was that last one? Maybe
Damn,
4 or 5
man. Yeah, it was like 4 or 5 years ago. We were like in Greenpoint, right?
No, it was in LA.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Oh, yeah, you were house sitting. I had like the portable...
No, I wasn't house sitting. I was at my friend Sonny and Nate's house, and
it's all
I was doing that thing at the Geffen Contemporary.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So you've been busy. What's up with Time Lord? I want to know. You've got a huge new project. You should let us know about it.
Yeah, Time Lord TV. It's a TV show. I put it out every month. It's kind of like a magazine. We have like a monthly issue, and it starts out with a brief astrological forecast for the month that I compose and illustrate, you might say, with film montage. And then we always have a musical guest, and they also provide the score for the astrological forecast. And then we always have a guest who's working in occultism at this time, so we have like a Goetic magicians and scholars and Freemasons and authors and all kinds of people giving their insights on, whatever area of the occult they're working in. So this month is going to be a great show because we've already shot the musical guest segment. It's a dance. It's a dance duo, I guess you might say, that are very prominent in the art world. They're called Fluct, and they're awesome. And they're the musical guests and very insightful, brilliant ladies. And then our occult guest, you might say, is Christina Engelhardt, whom I discovered from the Aliens and Artists podcast. And she and Federico Fellini for years communicated with these trans-dimensional beings via like telephone calls on payphones. And, they would send them they'd be like, go to the hotel lobby at 3:30 p.m. And Fellini would walk downstairs and Christina Engelhardt would be there. And he's like, oh my God, it's you. We have to take you to Tulum to like find Carlos Castaneda and like all this stuff.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's there's other stories like what's his name? Paul Foster Case has had stories like that where he's like, I'm in contact with aliens, and like, how are you in contact with aliens? It's like, oh, I met him at a hotel. It's like, what?
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, the story that this woman tells, Christina Engelhardt, well, first of all, she's a brilliant storyteller, and but it's almost frightening because these beings, whoever they were, even if they were, human pranksters or whatever, they really were watching them very closely and knew where they were and knew what was going on, knew how to reach them. And they were getting all these messages. It's almost surreal to hear a name like Federico Fellini and know that a story like this is happening. So it's really fascinating. And Christina Engelhardt is a lovely woman. She's also a psychic medium, and she's does tarot and astrology since she was very young. And she also dated Woody Allen when she was in her teens. She's in the recent Woody Allen documentary on HBO. I saw her on that too. So wow. I'll be interviewing Christina Engelhardt in Los Angeles this coming Saturday. I'm very excited about that. And we'll have Flucht, and it's a great show. I'm really happy about this project.
It sounds like it's like an occult variety show almost.
That's exactly what it is. People call it that all the time. Yeah. It's like a Johnny Carson almost, or something like that.
Interesting. So I do have to say, like I was complimenting you on, I think on text or whatever also, but Time Lord has the best production value of any occult media venture I have ever seen. And I just want to compliment you on that because it looks awesome. And I appreciate that because I know how hard it is. I don't know if you have a team working with you or not, but it looks really good.
Well, I do have I have a background in video and film. I've directed a lot of music videos in my day, and I've, made a lot of short films in my day. So I do, I've got a great director of photography. I've got a great color corrector. So they help. But my background as a filmmaker really helps to bring it all together. And, that was part of why I did it. I saw a lot of astrologers kind of flipping their phones around and being, hey guys, Jupiter enters Pisces and stuff like that. And just kind of very off the cuff. And I'm like, I want to do something with more formal, right? With more concrete, something with more longevity. And that's not off the cuff, that treats things with more respect, I think, and more reverence. And, it was also based on that show, Thinking Aloud, when they would interview kind of Joseph Campbell and Terrence McKenna and Colin Wilson and stuff in the 80s on PBS. You got to check that. You'd love that show.
That sounds great. Yeah, that sounds very trip down nostalgia lane. That sounds really good.
Oh man, yeah. The Joseph Campbell one, the Colin Wilson one's great. The Terrence McKenna one's great. And I believe you can watch them on Gaia, and some of them are on YouTube. But I loved how they were having these cutting edge thinkers, on this show called Thinking Aloud, as in thinking permitted, and kind of in this environment we're in right now where content is kind of thrown at us in like memes, and everybody wants to go viral. So they want to keep their content nice and, frivolous and nice and open to everybody. And I'm like, well, what about those people in the world who are starved for intelligent content?
No, I think you're completely right. And the good thing is it's really happening. I think that, it's been such a cliche for so long that people are saying, oh yeah, like nobody has an attention span anymore. Like people don't read, they're on their phones all the time. But, when I started doing this show, and I'm a bit more regular with it now than I was, but now when I started doing this show, I realized that is not true at all. It's actually like the Marshall McLuhan thing of the medium is the message, where it's actually the format of the technology itself that's doing that, not people's brains. It's like, yeah, if you're on a phone scrolling through Instagram, of course you're going to have a short attention span. But podcasts and long form video content on the internet, now that we have broadband, proves the opposite. Where people more than half of America listens to podcasts now. Like people will sit for a 3-hour podcast, or they'll binge. Or the other thing is they'll binge watch a show for 30 hours on Netflix. So I think that it's not true that people have a short attention span. They're just being presented, they're presented with a medium that encourages a short attention span that is meant to be consumed with a short attention span, then yeah, they will. But people are, I think, more intellectually starved than ever. And I think that that's really a space for people like you and people like me to step up more than we were before, I think.
Yeah, and I try to make it aesthetically pleasing. I try to make it fun. I also kind of inspired by what Glenn O'Brien's TV party. I've got my like weird downtown like art world friends on the show demonstrating what they do, and we're having a good time. It's a fun show.
Are you doing you're doing that witch hotline thing also, right?
No, that's not me. That's my friend Frank Haynes.
Oh, okay. I thought you were involved in that.
Well, I made an appearance on Witch Hotline.
Okay.
But that's done by this artist named Frank Haynes, who's a very dear friend of mine, and he actually works with me on Time Lord TV. He helps with camera and lights, and he's been a huge support system for me, and he's really like a spiritual brother to me. He's a wonderful person, and he is the genius behind Witch Hotline.
Yeah, that is hilarious for anyone who hasn't seen that. I guess you should just look it up on Instagram, right? But it's like, I think it's on YouTube also, right? But
no, it's just on Instagram.
It's just on Instagram. It's super funny.
Frank is a performance. He has a performance art pedigree and a design and art. He's a one very talented artist, and so right now he's pouring that into many projects, but Witch Hotline is definitely a favorite.
Excellent. So what's the reception been like so far for your show?
Oh, it's been good. Yeah, I think people really like it. It has and that's the thing. It appeals to different parts of the show. Appeals to different people. Some people like the astrology the best. Some people like the guests the best. Some people like the music. Like a variety show. There's stuff for everybody. So there's and I try to present the content, if I can, in a way that is relatable, and in a way that people can begin to understand topics that are difficult. Topics like goetic magic, topics like Freemasonry and initiation, topics like the lunar zodiac and the lunar mansions. I mean, this is difficult material, but I've been lucky to have guests that have so much charisma and so much intelligence, and they really put forth this information in a captivating way. So the show's been very fortunate.
That's great. I really hope it's really successful for you. It looks awesome. I need to catch up on episodes, but is it timelord.tv, right?
Well, you're on the list. We got to get you on the show for sure.
Damn. Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
You're definitely getting on Time Lord.
That'd be great.
But yeah, it's a YouTube channel, Time Lord TV. So
cool. Yeah, definitely. I'm going to catch up on that. People should definitely check that out. I'm really excited about it because I love you. I've known you for 20 years and something.
Oh yeah,
right?
I've known you for a long time. I think I met you maybe 2004.
Yeah, if not slightly earlier, maybe. But yeah, probably 2004. But yeah, just a quick recap. You contributed to Generation Hex, and that's how I know you. Right. So, I also think that I actually had a really heartwarming moment when I was watching your Instagram, and I think you had an interview, or somebody was interviewing you or something, where there was a clip of you talking about astrology, and you were talking about how fulfilling it is for you to work with students and help them make life changes. And it's not just about what you know, it's about what you can provide for other people. That was so awesome for me. That really touched me, because I've also come to a similar conclusion. As you know, I teach magic, right? So for me, you saw me in peak edgelord mode, right? And so now, as we all were back then, although you were always the most classy and sophisticated of anyone, but for sure, for sure.
What do you mean the most classy and sophisticated of whom? Of what?
Of that whole occult scene. You're refined. You have an elegant and refined way of doing things, and you insist upon it, and that is very rare, right? So, no one else was doing that. So I always appreciated that, But you were talking about, of being of service and helping other people. And that's also the conclusion that I've really come to. As you know, I was so kind of burnt out and cynical for a while. And then I had a realization at a certain point that it's like, no, Jason, you're just being an asshole. It's like the whole point of this is, what can you do for other people? That's all that matters, right? It's like, whatever you learned, it's not about hoarding information in your brain because you're going to die anyways, and who cares, right? It's about, or collecting crazy experiences you've had. It's about what you can do for other people. And that for me, actually that realization completely turned my life around, where all of a sudden it was, things were great again, because it was about, no, you're there to teach or to provide a service and to help people. And so when I heard you expressing the same thing, it was like, oh yeah, that's great. That's as it should be, right?
Yeah. Well, that was on Jake Coburn's podcast. And which was, I think, just came out maybe about a month ago or a couple weeks ago. And I wasn't really talking about students. I was talking about my astrology clients.
Right.
And how, and this moment really comes from, I have a teacher, an astrology teacher. I would call him a master, really, under whom I study. His name's Austin Coppock. He's a very well-known astrologer, and deservedly so. I mean, he's a brilliant magician. He's a brilliant astrologer. His book, 36 Faces on the Decans of the Zodiac, I mean, really changed astrology for me, I think. And being his student has also changed astrology for me. And I'd had a session with this woman, and she'd been gifted the session, by a young family member who's another client of mine. And she, it started out very mom and very like, oh, cute. And then, as astrology tends to do, even if the person isn't forthcoming right away, it gets into the heavy, it gets into their pain, and it gets into whatever they're struggling with at the moment. And I'm getting emotional just thinking about it. And so, eventually this woman and I were talking about this very difficult thing that she's going through. And the astrology was so accurate in pointing it out. And the astrology was also so accurate in pointing out medicine and help, and how she could really optimize the situation and succeed, navigate it successfully. And afterwards, I just had to write to my teacher, Austin, and I had to be like, listen, studying under you and my capacities as an astrologer now, and the way that I'm able to help people through their darkest problems has just been like the best job in the world. It's just been the most meaningful thing to help someone save their marriage, to help someone save their kids, and it's not me. It's the astrology, right? Astrology is such a powerful tool, that it's not that I have this special gift. I just have an understanding and an engagement with astrology. And I was thanking my teacher. I was like, listen, I just can't thank you enough for what you've given me. And he wrote me back, and he's like, that's the key. He's like, if we're not helping people and we're not using this to help people improve their lives, then it's just masturbatory knowledge. We're not, and I'm not on Twitter or anything, so I don't hear the astrologers who are spouting their knowledge all day long. Like I don't engage with that. So I'm not familiar with that world, but I know it's there. And my teacher really, I think, put it in the loveliest way. It's like that's really what it's for. Astrology has always been a tool to help people through the vicissitudes of life.
That's really beautiful. I mean, I think that's true of all magic in a way, even individual magic that is pursued for your own enlightenment, for lack of a better word. I mean, part of that is for the benefit of others, and so I think that. But it's true just the fact that, being of service to others, that's not just magic. I mean, I think that's kind of the meaning of life in a way, or a meaning, right? That when you make it not about yourself and about what you can do for other people, then everything just clicks into place, where it's like all these things, whether it's magic and astrology or tarot, or whether it's roofing houses, right? Like any human skill at the end of the day is just a tool for making life better for yourself and the people around you, and improving our collective evolution here, I think, and that's, I think as and as you probably observed with me and lots of people that we know, I mean, there's definitely a stage with magical people, particularly in their 20s, where they are very oriented, even if they don't think they are, right? And that there can be a lot of not just ego aggrandizement, but edgelording, but it's not just that, it's just the feeling of like, oh, woe is me. Like, why is this not work? Why is my life a mess or something like that? And I think the fundamental orientation there is, or, just the simpler way of saying that is just the drama, capital T, capital D, right? That people generate. And a big part of that is that their perception is oriented towards themselves and not towards other people. And at the end of the day, like I said, I think, whether it's astrology or tarot or, meditation, teaching meditation, or learning how to put roofs on people's houses, whatever it is, it's at the end of the day, it's just something it's a skill that you're getting good at. Music, any art is the same way. It's just a skill. And if you're actually good at it, then you can use it as a service for other people, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah. And, well, wait, first of all, what is edgelording? I don't know what that is.
Oh, so yeah, edgelord. I guess this is internet slang. Edgelording is like being like deliberately provocative and shocking and pushing people's boundaries and being like, oh yeah, like I listened to Lustmord. You couldn't handle that, like that type of thing. You know what I mean?
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like being lord of pushing the edge and pushing people's boundaries and being like that kind of shocking person.
Oh, okay, I get it. Yeah. Well, I'm not, absolved, of narcissism, right? I'm not absolved of being selfish and self-centered or any of those things at all. However, one thing that's great about astrology, it's almost a tool that takes you out of yourself in a way, or it, helps you engage with compassion and strong engagement into the life and the karma of somebody else. And then also really, especially with traditional astrology, which I practice, Hellenistic, medieval, Renaissance astrology, we see that our chart is not really just us. The only part of our chart that is us technically is the ascendant, right? That point on the eastern horizon at the moment of our birth. The rest of our chart is other people and other
you mean
things.
Like generational planets and Pluto and all the outer planets, or for whole blocks of people, that type of thing.
Right. But also, okay, your rising is you, right? And then your seventh house, what's setting in the sky at the moment you're born, that's not you. That's your partner.
Huh.
That's who you're with. The fourth house at the nadir of the chart, that is your family. That's your domestic and private environment and your past. And the apex or midheaven of the chart, this is your public persona, your social prestige, right? But it's also the people in a sense that in a helpful way, but do dominate you, right? Who deign to give you that success and whatnot, and then we have houses that are social, that are your friends. And we have houses that are dealing with things like siblings and immediate social environments. Then we also have houses that are succedent. So these are houses of property, right? Our property, the property of others, things like this, creative cachet, our children. These are all in the chart. It's not just us. And it's almost as though everybody's astrological chart is this kind of protoplasmic web or something that engages with the charts of others all the time, so we're really like bubbles. It's almost this like Sloterdijk kind of idea of like constantly being absorbed and reabsorbed into each other's drama, but with a big beautiful capital D, what I mean? Like drama in this kind of mythological sense, right? That gives our life meaning and that makes our life the opera that it is. It's as though our charts are weaving in and out of each other in this way that is very connected, and it's not about solipsism, and it's not really I love a lot of things about modern astrology, the astrology up until the 1990s, you might say, but that was very psychological based. It's like, oh, when something transits your seventh house, you're going to feel this way about your marriage. It's like, no, the ancients say that when something transits your seventh house, it will affect your partner, and it will affect you through the partner.
So it's not just like a me culture thing. That's
not at all.
I love how you describe that about like this kind of universal ballet. Did you relate that to the body of Nuit?
Interestingly, no, but almost by accident. I was thinking recently about how, and I'm paraphrasing, but there's that Crowley. I don't know where it's written in Crowley's work, but something about the goddess Nuit, right? Who is the goddess of infinite space and the infinite stars thereof, and all this. And they say that the shapes of creation are traced upon her body, and in that sense, yes, it's as though the zodiac represents the
constellations.
Yeah, and obviously, not just the zodiac, the dome of stars that is beyond the belt of the zodiac as well. It reminded me a lot of kind of John Dee and that in Elizabethan stuff, you hear about the book of nature and how nature is meant to be interpreted. Nature is a living, breathing entity that is meant to be decoded almost and interacted with, and it's very much an animist perspective, I would say, even if it's just philosophical and not necessarily spiritual, even though Dee, if anybody was communicating with spirits, it was John Dee, right?
No, I agree, and I think that that's really the definition of what Hermeticism is. And I think it's just, for me, all of this stuff, particularly at this point, is just about looking at what is right in front of my face. It's about observing nature, and I think that, in Dee's time, they used the term natural philosopher for people who are into this stuff, which I think is still a great term. Natural philosophy. It's exactly what you're saying, which is they're observing the book of nature, and I think that's more about, it's about more than just observing, for instance, the physical nature and the movements of stars, which of course it is about, but it's also about just, particularly as you get older, being perceptive and being aware of the patterns of life, and that there is a pattern and there is a structure in a Platonic sense, and in a sense that changes as well. And that's it's more than just a fundamentally comforting experience to understand. It's like one of the great gifts of magic or occultism or natural philosophy, or whatever you want to call it, is that you get a sense that there really are patterns to existence. And that is so comforting because it shows you that there's meaning to life, not in the sense of the meaning of life, but that there's meaningful patterns and things that are beyond you and things that are eternal and will outlast you. I would even go so far to say that the lack of perception of that, which most people dwell in, unfortunately, and which modern philosophy and modern science enforce by saying that there's no kind of, existence is rudderless and chaotic and constructed, undermines that almost in the sense of, in the Qliphoth at the top of instead of Kether, you have Thaumael, the competing gods, right? And it's like that, where I think even particularly for young people, growing up, children and adolescents, if they have a sense that there's no structure and no meaning to existence, nothing is more inherently demoralizing, and nothing is more inherently exciting and moralizing and uplifting than to realize exactly what you're saying, which is there are patterns and there is structure to nature, and that therefore there's intelligence and compassion in the universe, and you're not just alone adrift in randomness.
Totally. And yeah, like even the word metaphysics, I think now when we hear the word metaphysics, we imagine a crystal shop somewhere or, some kind of new age thing. But what metaphysics really is is the philosophy of reality, right? Is what is our interpretation of reality? What is our interpretation of our material surroundings that we perceive as reality? That's the essential definition of metaphysics, right? It's been sequestered into this, like, I don't know, Sedona, Arizona kind of place right now, but why should it be? Why should it be outre, and why should it be bizarre to study the nature of reality? Like, why does it have to be compartmentalized in this way? Why shouldn't it be integrated into the way that we are alive? But if you really think about it, I mean, there's very few people that I can think of in this world who do not sense some kind of mystery. I mean, maybe it's the circles I run in, but I don't think so, because I know all kinds of people. I hang out with 90-year-old men who watch Fox News all day sometimes. You know what I mean? And almost everybody I know is at least has an inkling of the mystery that is reality, and the symmetry that exists, or the patterns, as you say. It's almost impossible to completely shut oneself off to that, I think, and not sense it, and the fact that I don't want to be poster boy for astrology or anything, but like you said, it's so uplifting and excited. I can literally be sick in bed, and if I've got a astrology meeting coming up, as soon as it starts, I'm like, boom, all the energy just returns to my body, and I just feel so alive. And well,
you've always been like that. I mean, you've always loved magic, so it's like, it's always been, and me too, it's like it's been your thing, and you've always been enthusiastic about it, which I've very much appreciated. But yeah, no, I think that what you're talking about, it's just human nature. And, when you look at, for instance, I've met so many people from the former Soviet bloc, right, who were super into this. And you probably have too, right? And particularly in New York, you meet so many people who came from Russia or other Soviet bloc countries. And my general impression of them is that they are often much more serious and studied than Americans, and like very serious about it. And one of the reasons is because a couple of reasons. One is all of this stuff was banned under communism. And when the wall fell, there was one of the first things that happened was there was a massive explosion of interest in spiritualism. And one was because people could now do it without being killed. But the second was because when times are chaotic, as they are right now all over the world, and there's a sense of helplessness and a sense that the authorities don't know what they're doing, and they're just lying to you, and that things are inevitably going to fall apart, and that just we're being swirling down a drain, then the inherent nature of human beings is to look for structure, order, and just something to lean on. And everyone, no matter who you are, no matter what your background is, no matter where you're at, everyone needs someone to tell them that it's going to be okay, and not as a lie, but to find the way in which it will be okay, because there always is one. Not in every sense, but in many senses, and ultimately, the real gift of spiritualism, or whatever you want to call this, is to understand that if you zoom out far enough, in the galactic sense, everything is fine, and So, but I think that the fact that the Soviet world went through that really is a testament to what you're saying, which is very, very few. I don't know if there is a true atheist in the world, but very few people can live without a sense of connection to the mystery. It's just that we have obviously squabble about the details, although not as much as people, the Christopher Hitchens of the world really dial up that religion is a source of conflict, or that belief in the transcendent is an inevitable source of conflict or war. But I think if you really study history, it's not necessarily the case. Even when you look at things like the Catholic Protestant wars in Europe, or the Troubles in Ireland and things like that, if you really dig under the surface, what you start to see is, like I was just talking to someone on the podcast about this, from Ireland, you really start to see that those are just surface dressings on much deeper conflicts. It's not really about religion. So,
oh yeah, I mean, dogma is what causes that kind of schism, not spirituality. You know, it's when spirituality becomes codified and petrified even into something that can be weaponized. You know, I mean, humanity, we're going to weaponize anything that we get our hands on, really. You know, so that's what it is. But it's not that spirituality or belief in transcendence is inherently dangerous. You know, on the contrary, and magic thrives, like you were saying, when the consensus is inadequate. You know, or when society is somehow, you know, intolerable in some way, and that's when great things just tend to happen. All of a sudden, an important book will get discovered or translated, and people start, it's like some egregore gets unearthed, right? And we all start latching onto it and learning about it and incorporating it into our practices and stuff like that. So it's very much, yeah. And I see what you mean too, about how it's different in America than in other countries. You know, I feel like even in places like London, you know, when I was a kid, like I remember that their attitude toward occultism was very like, oh yeah, you know, like this is just it. And which I related to a lot more than in America. I felt people were very much like, oh, I'm buying a book on John, you know, Enochian magic. Look at me, kind of vibe,
right?
You know, and
although that said, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, it's like London, very like, you know, occultism is so baked into England, from to the old witchcraft to Spare and all of that. But that said, people are more intellectually sophisticated with it there, perhaps. But the thing that I really do appreciate about America, and it's probably because of our, which you don't as much get in England, that is probably a artifact of our religious heritage of being of coming here to escape, you know, England and the old world, and also being religious heretics, is that people are very sincere and sweet, and people are very open, much more open and much more heart open in America, and much more willing to accept that. I would say incorporate the whole idea of magic into, for lack of better way of putting it, the quest for God in a really true and deep sense, than you get in England, where England is extremely dry, arch, cynical, and not very spiritual, despite the fact that they are, you know, not in all cases, but not very spiritual and not very spiritually open, despite the fact that they're much more intellectually sophisticated with occult topics. You know, just England's a godless atheist country. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I see what you mean for sure. You know, my family's from Cuba, and you know, it's funny. You know, the attitude toward magic that my family always had was that the elegant ladies of my family, whom I love to death. I mean, I've got a beautiful family, and they're so cool. And you know, they would be in society. They'd be like, "Oh, never would I practice Santeria. I'm a devout. I'm a devout Catholic. I'm a devoted Christian. I would never practice magic." And then as soon as like the doors are closed and everybody's out of the room, they're like, "Oof, I better get all that stuff out of the closet and do some magic right now." You know, like, so like they did it in secret because they believed in it so much, and they really were so. It was so genuine because it was secret. Does that make sense? They weren't making a show about it in any way. They weren't trying to. In fact, they might have even been ashamed that they did this. You know,
sure.
They didn't want society knowing that they were engaging in this behavior.
Yeah, they're in the closet, literally. But
literally in the closet. They were practicing this stuff. They had my great aunt had a walk-in closet in Coral Gables in Miami, and then a closet within the closet.
Oh, damn!
And that's where the swords and chalices and, you know, portraits of saints with bleeding wounds were kept. I remember
you telling me about that. I still think about that sometimes. But yeah, you know, there's parts of, for instance, in China, you know, the Tibetans have to practice Tibetan Buddhism in their closets, or they'll be tortured and killed. So there's many things about. There's I think. One of the incredible things about our current moment, and I've been saying this forever, but it only gets more and more true, is that this is perhaps one of the only times in history, in recent, you know, and I mean recent on a long time scale, but recent history, that people have been able to operate out in the open. And I don't think we should underestimate that we really do live in a golden age. And I think that what you were saying just now, where you were saying, there's this kind of group egregore where people are learning new information and taking new things on, that's amazing, right? And I think that that's so much more the case now than even 20 years ago. I mean, we've seen so much change in our own lifetimes. I mean, I think you and I were kind of early to the party. And at least in my case, I had a tendency to kind of distance myself from the party early because I thought it was never going to happen. And that obviously was not the case. And I think that, when in the early 2000s, I mean, I was in occult groups and things like that, but it was still all extremely secret and small. And there were really good things about that, where you were saying kind of, it's like when you keep it hermetically sealed, then it's much more meaningful and powerful. Things do lose power when they're exposed to the public, let alone the internet, right? But the flip side of that is that I think that just even in our own lifetimes and to some extent through our own efforts, we've seen and I certainly credit you with with a lot of it in New York. I think we've seen a gigantic, the Renaissance we wanted to happen. It's like when we were doing Generation Hex, I could count the number of magic people I knew certainly on two hands, but it was very small. And of course it wasn't, but people were just much more quiet about it. And now that is not the case, right? I mean, you were one of the only people that I knew that was all about it. You know what I mean? And
right.
And I was going to say earlier, it's like, not to slight anyone, but a lot of the people that were in Generation Hex have fallen off, or were never fully practiced or disciplined in the first place in the way that you were. Right. And you haven't, you've only, because this is really a sincere thing for you. Right. And you've been pushing really hard for the whole time as I have. And I think that, we really are seeing the occult renaissance we want it to happen. And I think it'll just keep getting better. And I think, I hope that people continue to get more disciplined and sincere about it as time goes on.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, people are doing such great work. It's like I consider myself a small fish at this point. I mean, the kind of work that books that are coming out on this stuff and translation work that's happening. And, I mentioned Austin Coppock earlier, but then there's also, all sorts, Demetra George, all these people, Gordon White does great work. These people taking magic and really working with it, you know what I mean? And they have the expertise and they have the experience. And, Ryan Butler's made, I don't know how many Lunar Mansion talismans, and he can tell you what they're all going to do. And, Christopher Warnock has made this many planetary talismans, and he can tell you what to expect when you're practicing astrological magic. And, it has been, and these people have been working for the past 20 years too, So it really, I just feel like to be an occultist right now is so awesome, because our resources are richer than ever. I mean, the Picatrix, we would read about the Picatrix in books by Francis Yates and, books about Renaissance Italy, or about even the architecture of Washington, D.C., how planetary magic was used in all of these constructions, right? In all these metropolitan, what do you call that? Like urban planning, I guess you might say. Shout out to William Kiesel for that. I mean, I remember when he first put that out, like I think when I was living in Vancouver, right? So in 2000, or maybe before. But yeah, he's done so much to bring so much cool stuff out at Mortlake Books, Mortlake and Company. 100%. Yeah. I mean, that's like the translation of the Picatrix is, I mean, that's kind of a historical event, I would say, and then there's the other, there's the John Michael Greer and Warnock translation as well. And I honestly am a big fan of them both. I think that they have different virtues. Both translations are good in their way depending on what your purposes are. But yeah, I mean, it brought this magic that was really, I mean, not only basically for the patrician classes through the Renaissance and forward, but the freaks who knew the Latin and studied the astrological magic of those times, right? So like Elias Ashmole and stuff like that, maybe. And now anybody can have a copy of it. You know, anybody can work with planetary magic. Anyone can work with talismans or, you know, the lunar mansions and any of this stuff. And we were talking earlier about Damien Eccles, you know, and I know you and I love, at least I do still, like, I love Hermetic magic, right? I love all the pageantry and all the Edwardian exclusivity of it and all that stuff. And, you know, even the aesthetics and the Dion Fortune, like, oh no, not for the uninitiated, you know, like that kind of vibe. It's great.
Clutching your pearls at Stonehenge.
But it's so forbidding, you know, and it's so, and luckily we had Austin Osman Spare coming out of that, who's like, well, wait, we can actually all fuck with this. And then the whole, you know, chaos magic trajectory from there that we obviously Genesis is and Sleazy and all the Throbbing Gristle, Psychic TV, Coil. This is how I got into magic, you know, through Current 93 and all these musicians that I loved and stuff. So we had that current, of course, that came out of it being like, no, let's make this household stuff. Let's make this available to anybody and experiment with edgelording, as it were, maybe like experimenting with like expanding the limits of consciousness, expanding the technologies of magic. They need not be exclusive to chalices and sashes and things like this. But
do you remember? You must know the Ramsey Dukes' idea of the OTTT.
No, I do not.
So you'll love this. I forget which book this is in. You're going to get a kick out of this. So Ramsey Dukes, who's obviously just one of the formative intellects of chaos magic in the 70s, said, you know, the original idea of chaos magic is, oh, well, you don't need all this stuff. You can simplify it. So it's like you don't really need like a silver chalice. I mean, you can just use like a you know, paper cup, right? You know, it's still water. And Ramsey Duke said, it's like, well, yes, I mean, you can make things less elaborate and less florid. But, you know, hey, if we're breaking the rules here, why not make them more elaborate and more florid?
Fuck yeah.
And he was saying, so his idea was the OTTT, which is the over-the-top order. And he was saying, it's like, instead of having a silver chalice or a paper cup, why not, you know, your magical cup should be, you know, the skull of a Tibetan that you personally raided from a 14th century monastery while fighting off, you know, Maoist troops. It's like, so I'm all about that.
Oh yeah, me too. I mean, I'm all about, you know, like, you know, stripping off my clothes, wrapping myself in like a lion skin and like stuffing a partridge with all these like fruits sacred to Venus and like eating it with my bare hands or whatever. Like I honestly, I really
this is any given Saturday for you. Do you actually have a lion skin?
I do not have a lion skin, but
you shouldn't admit to it if you do. But
you know what I mean. Something kind of resembling one, maybe. But the thing is that
leopard print spandex.
Yeah, I do think that's. Oh, I definitely have used a lot of leopard print spandex in my magical career. That is no joke.
Okay,
but I think that stuff does make your magic more powerful, right? The more stuff you throw on, if that's your sensibility. I mean, I'm kind of a theatrical person, so I like that kind of stuff. You know, you got to
get your vibe right, and putting effort into it is important.
Right.
Yeah.
And you know, whatever's going to focus your mind, if that's aesthetics and that's pageantry and that's food or whatever it is, then use that stuff. But if not, you know, there's also been a tremendous current right now with the Greek magical papyri, which is, you know, really old, really like street magic. You know, my friend Chris Rapucci, he's an astrologer and a very good, knows a lot about the lunar zodiac and the kind of magic involved there. And he's got some really interesting ideas on this stuff. And, you know, the Greek magical papyri is much more, you know, working with spirits that the Golden Dawn might have called devilish or whatever, because they're more connected to nature and they're more connected to the biological and animal realms, and that was kind of looked at as, I think, unholy in Edwardian England or something. And then the Greek magical papyri, you've got all this stuff, and there's one spell in there that's pretty famous. It's called "Wine, you are not wine." And that means that you can convert pretty much anything into whatever you need for a magical ritual or not. Like this grapefruit soda. I could be like, grapefruit soda, you are not grapefruit soda. You are the, you are the nectar from the teats of Isis, who, whatever.
Right.
And so,
I think that idea that you just put out there, I mean, that really does cut to the core of what magic is, which is using. I really think that magic at its core is, I mean, I don't really follow any recipe books anymore. I mean, I think that magic at its core is consciously changing the meaning of things. It's like because you have to realize, particularly psychedelic experience, which I don't think is core to anything. I'm just bringing up as a frame of reference because people are way too over enthusiastic about psychedelics these days. But that. Particularly something like LSD shows you that everything in your perceptual field is largely an arbitrary construction that you've layered meaning on top of. And magic but it's arbitrary. And magic, just like what you said, it's like magic is the conscious, is like Adam naming things in the Garden of Eden. It's like magic is the conscious recontextualizing of meaning of things, whether it's at the very, as as an astrologer, at the most, surface level, or not surface, but the most, perhaps the most useful level is recontextualizing events in your life as recontextualizing things that happen to you. The most basic and the most healing magical act is taking something that's happened to you in your life and telling yourself a story about it that's not a lie, but that turns it into something that was. It changes it from you being victimized by a random event to something that was supposed to happen to move you along in your path. Right. Like that. Right. Everyone does that naturally. That's the most core act of magic. It's like, a car hit me and I couldn't walk for 6 months, but actually that was the best thing that could have happened. You hear people say this all the time. It's like, that's the best thing that could have happened to me, because otherwise, I would have ended up, working in this job that would have been terrible for me, or whatever it happens to be. You know what I'm saying? So that's what magic really is, I think, when you really, and then in my way of thinking, it's like magic is about, I mean, it's just the technology of it's changing and photoshopping what's going on in your brain, right? But in a non-grandiose way, perhaps, saying it's consciously reattributing new meanings to things in life to make it in accord with will. Or another way of saying that is, if you have a goal in life, anything that happens to you, or any physical thing, I mean, it's like you can change the meaning of it to support that, so that it's not, if you understand my gist, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that's the core of alchemy, right? Is transmutation of shit into gold, or whatever it is, or lead into gold. I think that's a core alchemical principle, of course, and it's also a core magic principle, right? Chaos magic principle of reorganizing and reconfiguring reality in a way. But then also, as because I wrote about it in Generation Hex, like psychedelics were a huge initiatory tool for me in my youth, where that was like, I don't know, that was like the Lewis Carroll moment for me, where I was like, all right, I know what team I'm on now. You know what I mean?
I agree with you 100%.
And one thing that it really made me realize from the first time I ever did acid, I was, 15 years old in Miami, and everything felt alive. Everything felt as though it was breathing. And this, I think, is another, area of alchemy and magic, right? Yes, there is the reorganization and there is the transmutation and all that stuff, but there also is a discourse and an intercourse with a living, breathing organism that is life.
That's a great point.
Yeah, and that is reality, and that there are spiritual entities around us all the time, and there are spiritual intelligences in every tree or stone or star, right? So that this is part of it too, I think, is kind of a another form of conjunctio in alchemical parlance, I guess you'd say, is this merging with life in a way that is I don't know, maybe erotic or maybe psychic or maybe something, but it's that feeling, like sometimes I remember being young, not even on drugs. And I would look at a piece of architecture in New York City and just be like, oh, how do I make that mine? I just want to I don't want to own it. I want to make love to it. Like I want to absorb it somehow. And that's something, I think that both magic and psychedelics are a big bridge into, is that kind of, again, animist, I think, window into the nature of things.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. And I think that those types of experiences that you're talking about really are what separates what begins to make a lifelong magician, right? Rather than somebody who's just trying a few techniques. I mean, once you get into that conversation, then it becomes your life and not just something that you're reading about. And I think we both have the experience of that we were doing magic before psychedelics, right? And that's rare. And I think that in my case, I was doing magic for like 3 years before I tripped for the first time when I was 21, and on mushrooms, and that's when everything clicked. It was like, oh, like all of a sudden all the dots just suddenly connected, and I could see the magic eye picture, and I could understand what suddenly everything was recontextualized. And it's like, yeah, like the car got turned on. That said, the reason I was saying that psychedelics are overemphasized is because I meant that culturally right now, where people are psychedelics have become another consumer product. They've become, oh yeah, microdose to work better at your job. And people, there's so many, they've just become there's mass awareness of psychedelics, which is good. But at the same time, it's like, oh, oh yeah, I'm going down to do ayahuasca to get the idea for my next app, and it's like everyone's talking about psychedelics as if psychedelics were the be all end all. As opposed to what you're talking about, which is they're a gateway to a whole world. And in my way of thinking, psychedelics may start the car, but magic is what is the language. Magic is the framework and language for dealing with that experience productively, right? And at a certain point, you don't need the psychedelics either. It's like, as with like astral work, you can set up a ritual, do the ritual, have a 10-minute astral experience, turn it off, and you're done. And you're sober the whole time. And as opposed to with psychedelics, where you're sitting there for 7 hours waiting for the damn trip to end at a certain point. And but it's no secret that those things go hand in hand. My point is that when people think that psychedelics are the destination themselves instead of just another tool in a huge toolbox of things that are available to people, then they just become druggies. So,
Right. But it is kind of cool though that like soccer moms are going to go do ayahuasca.
It's much
in
needed.
The jungles. It's also like I mean, mushrooms are alive. Ayahuasca is alive. These plants are also entities. These plants are also spiritual. You might call them gods if you want to, right? Or something.
Well, elementals, spirits. Certainly, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So if that's the way that they're going to creep into consciousness at a time where they're needed, is getting soccer moms to go down to the Amazon, then so be it, right?
Fair enough,
as long as we're moving towards something more high-minded, you know what I mean, and it's and something more integrated. I think that it's okay. You could say the same thing about astrology, right? Astrology is a consumer product, but at the end of the day, good, because obviously I disagree with a lot of representations of astrology that are on social media or stuff like that. And I think that they're not good. or whatever. I don't think that it's sound astrology that we see a lot of times.
Well, I've
But
always been of the mindset, even back in the Generation Hex days. I mean, it's like I've always been of the mindset that what you want to do is open the floodgates and let it go out into the marketplace, because what's going to happen is what we've successfully seen happen, right? Which is, you remember, I'm sure very well, the 80s when it was the Satanic Panic. And
right.
people could, I mean, Damien Eccles did go to death row, right? But people could, people had their jobs destroyed, their livelihoods destroyed. They were accused of all this, you remember all the stuff with the Temple of Set and all of that. I mean, it's people like throwing out these accusations and things like that. So, that was, you hear stories from Zena LaVey where she's like having to black out their windows and as a little girl, and like hiding, never walking by a window in case she gets shot. Like that was real. And I remember it very well because I grew up during that period, and as did you. And I think that, what you want the stuff out into the marketplace. So the taboo, that you do lose magical potency when something is released from the Hermetic seal. You do, absolutely. You lose potency when the taboo is lifted, but and there's going to be tons of tacky expressions in the open marketplace, but it provides safety in numbers, to be quite frank. And it provides a space for people who are really serious, which we're seeing more and more of now as there's more real estate for it. People who are really serious in doing some actual work in advancing the science of metaphysics, whatever you want to call it, who are very sincere. It provides the fertile ground for those people to emerge from, because they have an audience also, to be perfectly frank, because now everyone's into it.
Yeah, and it provides a springboard for getting into the depths of it later if you choose to, right? At least you're going to be accessible to it. I mean, when I was in the 5th grade, I was listening to like Paula Abdul, and then like later I got in like Nurse with Wound later or something, right? But it's like,
was there a direct line between those two?
Yeah. Yeah, LSD maybe.
Paula Abdul was the gateway drug for Nurse with Wound.
Yeah, but you know what I mean. It's like you segue into stuff.
Although Paula Abdul is fucking great, though. I mean, I still listen to that sometimes.
I definitely don't listen to Paula Abdul at home.
Not even Rush. Rush was so good.
But my point is that you need a taste of something. And it's true that the fact that it's mass, that it's widely available, and that people are really turning to it, and that people are really understanding how powerful it is kind of awesome. I mean, I never said to myself, oh, I would like to be a professional astrologer. It just happened, because I read tarot cards for so long for people that they'd come over for tarot, and I'm like, well, actually you're going to get astrology first, then we're going to do tarot, because they speak the same language, and I'm going to integrate them with a more educated purview, because I know you're basically tarot DNA first by analyzing your astrology chart, and then we can have more of a nuanced divination, right? Or one that's more interactive, and one that you've been walked through. And people just kept coming, you know what I mean? Until next thing I knew, it was what I was doing all the time. And that's when I was like, I'm going to get as good as this as humanly possible. Well, also because it is so magical, and it is so powerful, and it is so great. So I do, of course, love that so many people are turning to astrology right now and realizing how sacred it is, and realizing that no human civilization has ever ignored the celestial patterns, and celestial timing, and all of our architecture as humans. All of our architecture, all of our ritual, all of our mythology is based on this. How can there's no escaping it, right? It's so ingrained in our body and our philosophy and our sanctity that it's something that I think people are realizing, that there's something there. And I don't listen, man. If someone doesn't believe in astrology, I completely respect that. I'm like, look, there's no reason why you should. It's fucking ridiculous. I don't know why it works. I don't know. I can't explain. I think any good astrologer has moments that they look at themselves and be like, I must be insane. This cannot be real. Why is this real? I mean, sometimes it's terrifying, but the more you engage and the more you slip in, it's just fascinating and remarkable and sometimes even terrifying, what it can do and what it does do. I'm grateful for that. And I'm grateful that people are getting so much out of it and are looking to things like astrology or psychedelics or whatever else to get themselves out of a rut.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Let me ask you this. I'm curious, because I go back and forth on these things also. Or actually, I don't go back and forth. I'm pretty reductive. But without saying that, let me ask you. So when you think about astrology, and really this applies to particularly any divination system, tarot, runes, I Ching, whatever, right? But particularly tarot. Do you think that, like, when you're doing an astrological reading, do you think that there is literally, like, that there is actually a science of there are meanings that are just set and that are in that matrix, that stellar matrix, right? That you're just explaining the meaning of what you're seeing to the person, and they're really, the meaning is there, separate from you? Or do you feel that the symbol set of astrology allows you kind of a social space to get out of your own way and step out of yourself for long enough to communicate with that other person without allow kind of unconscious wisdom to emerge and allow the meaning to emerge from that situation that needs to be said, if you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, I think that both of those things are true, and I think that they inform each other. I think the more proficient you are in astrology and astrological techniques and or tarot symbolism, for that matter, or lore of tarot and stuff like that, the better equipped you are to release yourself into that space where intuition and random chance and other things like that can take part. But it's just, it's like learning an instrument or learning any art or skill. You do have to know the skills, and you do have to know the history, and you do have to know the theoretical framework. However, it is something that is alive. It's something that does have a consciousness of its own, and it does have a layers and layers of meaning and interpretation and significance that oftentimes overlap. I mean, as a Kabbalist, I'm sure you understand this, right? How almost every sphere on the tree of life is complete in and of itself, and contains all of its contradictions, and contains all of its everything, and contains all the other spheres within itself, right? So astrology and tarot are I mean, for me, Kabbalah was really the still probably is the foundation of my understanding of astrology, right? And my understanding of tarot.
Yeah, me too.
It's a way of, I think, arranging and organizing symbolism. I mean, sometimes people will come to me and they'll think that I'm a psychic, and I'm like, I'm not a psychic. I would call myself more of a computer, because I'm able to, my mind is able to, it's because of the training in Kabbalah, really, that the mind is able to kind of like bounce back and forth between so many correspondences and so many lenses of symbolism that are able to combine into a solid column of information, or a solid, and of course it's also a discourse with whoever I'm engaging with. But I wouldn't say that they are dead, codified, not alive monoliths of meaning, right? The symbols of astrology or the symbols of the tarot, I'd say that they're very much alive and dynamic. But the more that we learn about their historical meaning and their context and their different techniques of accessing and using them, the more we're able to apply artistry and engagement to that process.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
So it's both.
Yeah, I think that, particularly with Kabbalah and things like this, but really like a symbol that is eternal, this is, I think, really important for people to understand. Like a symbol, let's take things like, for instance, the zodiac signs, right? Those are symbols that have been with us since the dawn of human history and will be with us till the end of humanity, most likely. And I think that, short of civil nuclear war, but probably even then. And I think that you could still rediscover the constellations, so they'll always be there. And I think that what makes a symbol eternal is not that it has a fixed meaning that has stayed consistent for thousands of years. It's that so much meaning can be applied to it in a thermoplastic way, in the sense that, a symbol, and Crowley, like Crowley talks about this in book 4, where he says that, the Kabbalah is a filing cabinet. And I think the computer metaphor is so good. I mean, the spheres are folders on your desktop, and it's like so the concept of Geburah, or let's just as simple like Mars, right? A planetary symbol. You can, with one symbol, symbolize an almost infinite spectrum of things that yet all somehow have the same inner meaning, right? Whether it's the planet Mars, red, Aries, aggression, war, AR-15s, it's like it's all there, right? And I think that setting boundaries with people, you know what I mean? And I think that the Kabbalah, at least in my mind, is perfect. I don't, like, a lot of times people try to change it. You had like Frater Akkad tried to do his version of it, or people still will try to come up with new versions of it. But I think possibly, with the exception of the swap in the Book of the Law of Zadi, which does make sense to me, I think it's essentially a perfect structure. And the thing that is perfect about it is not that as you're saying, it's alive. It's not that it's not even a philosophy, really. It's not a dead system. It's just that you can fit in that pattern literally the entire universe of human meaning, right? Mm-hmm. And because we are, by our nature, animals that we are the time binding animal, right? Like our fundamental activity that we do as human beings is to fix time by setting events into symbols, even if it's just written language. And that seems to be what we do, right? We control time by symbolizing it. And the Kabbalah allows you to, just like you said, where you feel like you're a computer, it's, somebody comes to somebody who knows that, it's like, it's not that they have some type of supernatural talent, it's just that they have the map. And they know the map, and they can fluidly move around the map.
And some people do, have psychic ability and are a lot of ease with communicating with spirits and stuff like that. And we all have our different systems, I think, in working with this stuff. And we also have all of our different strengths and weaknesses, right? Different astrologers, different tarot readers and stuff like that. Like, we're like, oh, I'm really good at one kind of, this is my method. And, if you if you transform yourself into enough of a computer, your mind fries so much that things just start flying out of you.
Who are you talking to, Mickey? Come on. I've never done such a thing.
Yeah. It's like, they're not you, they're something else. And it's just so, I never will get sick of it. Yeah. I'll never get sick of it. I'll never have read too many books on any of it. I'll never have read too many books on Kabbalah or tarot or astrology or listened to too many podcasts. It's constantly, it's the more data you have, the more rich I think it all becomes, and also the more experiences you have too.
Yes,
that's a big one.
And just life experience, because Kabbalah is the tree of life, or the book of nature, right? And it's like, if you're 17, you haven't had a life yet, right? But if you're 40, or, as they said, you're supposed to be before you practice Kabbalah. So, hey, by the end of this year, I can officially practice Kabbalah. But if you have had enough of a life to understand that you've explored it, you've lived it, you've had, not in the sense of like, oh, you don't have a life, but like literally you've lived, so that you've taken the trip to a certain extent at that point, right? Like you understand what the texture of life is when you're out in the world. And I think that so as you just mature, the Tree of Life makes more sense. And so does the tarot, because like our lives, those cards are shuffled every single day of our lives. So you understand what the 10 of Cups means in such a deep way, like, and how maybe you have it or you don't, it's like, or any of these things. And you understand, better put is you understand what the symbol is referring to, rather than thinking the symbol is something important in and of itself, which is the biggest mistake in magic. I always say that to people. It's like, what are the dangers of magic? There's really only one, which is mistaking the symbol for the reality, and thinking there's something inherently special about the symbol. The symbol is just a reference point to a vast, a vast chunk of human experience. And not even in a Jungian way, like, oh, archetypes. It's like, no, I mean, just raw human experience. And I think that, but the other thing that I think the number one way to learn Kabbalah is pathworking, right? Which in and of itself it's just virtual reality. I mean, the astral is just VR, internal VR, but, actually doing the pathworkings through the spheres and the paths, that's when what you're saying, where like all of everything you've learned just snaps into place and you get it, right? It's like you understand what that is. Yeah.
I mean, but you never get it with like a capital G, right? Because like
is that
for
a Masonic reference?
I know. Sorry, but the 10 of Cups, for example, it's like that is a symbol that will continue to unfold for me until I die, right? The 10 of Cups is always going to be revealing itself to me forever, right? That the last decan of Pisces that's represented by the 10 of Cups. I mean, that's the ultimate, right? That's the big Wagnerian sacrifice at the end of the zodiac. That's something that I'll never, I mean, maybe, after lifetimes, that symbol just contains so much within it, right? However, and then, the more times that I experience astrological transits of the 10 of Cups, right? Or the more times I see it come up in readings and certain synchronicities around it, or the more I experience different planetary configurations, either in my own life or in the lives of others, or in the events in other people's lives that I see occur through different planetary configurations. And, the more I engage with spirits of a given anything, right? A given planet, a given sphere, a given time of day, the more informed I am of the tactile and the better glimpse I have into what a Kabbalistic idea can mean. And that's what pathworking is. You're exposed to, astral entities, right? You're exposed to visions and beings and associations and colors and all of the universe, I suppose, of a given sector of the tree. And then you can draw parallels. This is one reason too why I'm glad I stuck with the Thoth deck, the Crowley-Harris deck in tarot.
Yep.
Because I really think that the colors and I'm not dogmatic at all, right? I think there are many great tarot decks out there, and I love the Rider-Waite. I never shut up about it, and I love the Marseille, and I love all this stuff. I think they're beautiful, and but for me personally, there's something about the colors in that deck and what they trigger, and I've had the same Thoth deck, I think, since 2003. So yeah. It's going on. What is that? I mean, it's 18 years or something.
Yeah, I just found my Thoth deck that it's actually a German deck that I bought in Munich, and then I carried through Nepal, and I was giving tarot readings in Nepal, and people were asking me things like, should I jump the border to, my brother has just jumped bail that I paid for and gone to Bhutan. Should I cross over into Bhutan and kill him? It's like, try that for like, it's like, let's see, where can I get out of these cards that you should not? But I think the three decks that you just mentioned, the Marseille, the Rider-Waite, and the Rider-Waite and the Thoth Tarot are the only three decks those are the decks. And in my mind, the Thoth is bar none the deck. It is the best one, but it's not for beginners. You got to start with Rider-Waite. And the Marseille deck is interesting also to go kind of like, retro, but the Thoth deck is the best There's no
Yeah.
competition. There's no competition. It's the only astrologically correct one also, right? I think you would agree with that.
Rider-Waite Smith. I mean, Pamela Coleman Smith.
Yes,
those
thank you. Yeah,
drawings.
yeah, that's important.
And
Yeah,
Lady Frida Harris, the
Crowley Harris
paintings
deck.
on the in the Thoth deck is so mind blowing. And then, but that's the thing. I mean, dude, it's all data, because then you read Hodorowski's book on the Tarot of Marseille, and you're like, holy fuck!
Yeah.
How it's like, how the death card has the Tetragrammaton painted in the back of its skull, and you're like, I'm gonna die right now.
Damn.
It's just like, it's so.
Did you ever look at Spare's deck that they resurrected recently? There's a book about it. It's Fulgur or somebody like that put out, or was it maybe somebody else?
I thought maybe it was Strange Attractor. I don't
probably.
know.
Yeah, Mark. Yeah.
I never got I still haven't looked at that. Because we're living in this golden age of occultism, and so many rad books are coming out,
and they're all so many freaking $500 each.
Yeah, so many people are doing such great work with stuff. It's like I'm a little behind the game. Oh, and I meant to say this earlier, and I forgot to retract back on it. Damien Eccles, and I think the work that he's doing with making Hermetic magic accessible and angel magic,
and
he's breathing so much life into it, and he has such beautiful things to say about astrology and angel magic and all the stuff he works with that
he's doing good work, particularly in the wider culture and as an ambassador, and yeah, absolutely. It's a really exciting time. And I think that, let me ask you one more question about astrology, though, because I'm curious about this. Do you feel that forgive me, but there seems to be that there's a bit of a bell curve with astrology, where in the sense that, at the low end, you have people saying like, well, my sign says it's by, I'm a Sagittarius, and it says in the newspaper that, I'm going to have a bad day today or something like that. There's kind of like the super superstitious level of it. But there's also, and then in the middle, you get the vast, swath of normies who are saying like, oh, there's no science, astrology was long ago disproven. Like how, that's just ridiculous. And like, what do you like believe dragons are real? And like, going all Neil deGrasse Tyson mode. And then particularly like you were talking about the Greek magical papyri, you have people like Stephen Skinner, who are, has talked so much about, like, Prince Charles wrote the introduction to one of his books on feng shui. It's like, and so my sense is, and I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on this, that there's kind of like this sense, just socially speaking, and maybe this has always been the case, that astrology is something for like the peasants, like, for uneducated people. And then the supposedly intelligent middle classes are just like, oh, get out, that's ridiculous. But then you have people who are at the heights of royalty and business and like super like unbelievably powerful people are very, very into it. Would you say that's
sure.
You'd say that's true?
Well, I mean, I think it was, I believe it was JP Morgan who said, millionaires don't use astrology, billionaires
do. What they used to call him in the press? I just found this out this week, actually. Jupiter P. Morgan. His nickname was Jupiter. Jupiter Pierce Morgan, right?
Sometimes when I talk about Jupiter, I call him J.P. Morgan Joseph Campbell, because it's almost this this Gilded Age kind of energy. That
Jupiter, he's like the perfect. That was in the. I watched the John Milius movie, The Wind and the Lion, and they referenced that, and then I looked it up, and lo and behold, they used to call him Jupiter Morgan.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that it was J.P. Morgan who said that. Well, and also his. I mean, come on, in antiquity, or late antiquity in Alexandria, it was in a lot of ways only the patrician classes that were using astrology as we know it now. And, the solar zodiac with all of its hierarchical meanings of kings and peasants and all this stuff. And, and then, of course, the folk magic was discredited. If a peasant was looking at the sky to find his place in the world, like, oh, that wasn't really astrology, that was folk superstition or something. And I think right now we're seeing a cohesion of those two extremes, right? That it's no longer, like I said earlier with the Picatrix, right? It's no longer this like, because the Borgia and the Sforza and all those people, when you go to there's a wonderful book, Mary Quinlan McGrath. It's called influences, and it's about how astrological magic was used in the building of every palazzo in Renaissance Italy, right, all over the place. Like if the ruler of the ascendant of that particular prince was on the rising, then they would let the spades hit the ground and start digging, right, to build the castle. The castle had to have an astrological birth chart that was specifically timed. And, Washington, D.C. was built this way. All the buildings were inaugurated with very specific astrological charts. So it's always been a patrician thing. And then at the same time, it's also been a folk thing. Do you know what I mean? For example, in Cuban culture, and the way I grew up, we had Walter Mercado on in our house all the time. We had that kind of stuff.
Not to interrupt, but I do say that in a perfect world, I would have loved to see the episode of Time Lord with Walter Mercado on it, because that would have been fucking perfect.
I just would have, and my great aunt Cookie was really good friends with him too. And I tried to get, and I got his phone number from her, and his assistant picked up, and he never called me back. I wanted to make a movie about him, because I'm like, the thing about Walter is, and I was talking to my friend Sophia about this last night. She's also Cuban and older, the culture I grew up in was pretty homophobic, and it was also anti-magic. So the fact that somebody like Walter Mercado, with all of his regalia and his Liberace flamboyance and his occultism, telling you what to put in your bath on the full moon and shit, you could not disrespect that. He was so respected and so adored, and because Walter Mercado, he had something that Damien Eccles, I think, also has, which is something that's like, this person has a grace and a humility that that they have seen holiness, and that is, and also an elegance and a radiance. These people were fantastic.
Yeah, I think Walter is one of those masters, those hidden in plain sight masters, It's like, because, man, you got to be a tough being to pull something like that off. And, Jen used to call that dazzle camouflage, where you're so flamboyant that people just overlook you. It's another way of being in plain sight. Yeah.
He had a force field around him or something, because you just couldn't fuck with him. It was so beautiful. And, so I think exactly as what you're saying is that magic and astrology and things like this have always been considered either very lowbrow or very highbrow. And now is where those things are kind of, coalescing. I think that a lot of culture is that way. We have technology that's only available for elites in one sense, and then filters into society. And then, we have, cultural things such as music that's for some disenfranchised sector of society that all of a sudden seeps into the mainstream and becomes all the rage. There's nothing new about this. I mean, that's what bohemianism kind of is, right? Only the very high and the very low, because what is in the mean and what is in the interim is commonplace and bourgeois and tacky. So, but at the same time, we're at a point right now that I think these kind of class delineations around magic and astrology are starting to erode, and that it really is starting to, in its way and in its time, make its way into popular consciousness in hopefully a healthy way.
Yeah, and I think we're both part of that, and a lot of people are, and it's a group effort, and it's really exciting. And I think, that really the point of Jen's work so much, and this was, I wrote this and Jen agreed with it, is just that was basically to yank magic out of the grasp of, and I do use that as a pun because it is Jen, but yank it out of the grasp of the British ruling class and give it to the working class. And that is so much the trajectory that I've continued in my work, having grown up with Jen. It's just like, and studied with Jen, which is like the whole point of Magic.me is like, and that was the same thing that people were saying in the 90s though, it's just like, get this out to everybody. And we have now. And so I think we need to keep pushing and professionalizing it and getting it more and more, advanced at this point, I think, because I also think that, like you were talking about technology, which I thought was really interesting, and by the way, I agree with you. It's interesting when I was doing the research for the John Dee book. I was reading again some of Stephen Skinner stuff, and Stephen Skinner points out that people were doing Enochian and angel magic all the way from D to the Golden Dawn, but it was just the super aristocratic elite, and they were doing it in secret. It was only for the gentry. It was only for the aristocrats, and it wasn't allowed. No one else was allowed to have it, and so that's obviously, so much the unless you're a traditionalist or something, so much of the thrust of society is democratization and access. And because as you and I both know, magic is hard enough. People should at least have access to even and now we have a different problem, which there's so much information available that it's hard to know where to start. And,
right.
And, but people should have access to the resources in the same way that anybody can now get on the internet and give themselves a high school education very quickly. It's the same, right? So we want the human race, I think, to constantly, the human race always starts from a low base, but we want to raise that baseline. And it's the same in our discipline, I think. And, there's no comparison, I think. You probably agree. There's no comparison to the amount of access not only to information and resources, but other people than when we started, right? Let alone prior to that. And I think
definitely.
Yeah. And also just the only last point I wanted to make about technology is, I've said many times, we live in a magic world now, whether we like it or not. We live in a world where you can get on your phone and communicate as if by crystal ball with anyone in the world in real time, or have anything you want brought to your door within 24 hours. It's just like, and you can send vibes out that could backfire on you or could make you wealthy or successful or ruin your life, just the little magic missiles you send out on the internet. And I think that, and the only language, ironically, we live in a magical world now, thanks to technology is magic. But the only language we have to be able to cope with or deal with that, instead of crumpling into a ball and trying to go back, the only language we have to deal with that is magic. The language of even theosophy, things like that, what is it like? What does it mean? And what are the ethical frameworks required for living in a world where magic is real, which technology has done? That the occult tradition is right there with the right answers for that, I think.
For sure. Well, you mean it has the answers to the moral?
Well, in the sense of, what do I mean by that? It's like, so, it's been said before, it's like, having, the person with a cell phone, a smartphone in their pocket has more power than any other human in world history. It's like, and except for very much the controllers of society, at least in terms of ability, raw capacity to do things. And they have access to more information, certainly at the touch of a button, than anyone else in history, better than the Library of Alexandria, and yet they're on TikTok, But when you live in that world of where magic is real, how do you handle that? And by ethics, I mean, what is the framework for being able to interact with the world? So here's an example. I think about this quite a lot. Do you use the infinite power of technology to pursue your true will and get all the resources you need, get clear on what your true will, what your will for this life is, and then get all the resources you need and the information and the education in order to fulfill that? Or and then ascend to Kether? Or do you stay stuck being chewed by Karanzan and Doth, which would just be endlessly scrolling TikTok or, fighting on social media, or getting lost in more than just that, getting lost, the original meaning of Doth, knowledge, like Crowley says, the world of adjectives, the world where you're accumulating endless information, but it's just dust, right? It doesn't add up into anything. It's just you're collecting data points. Another word for Doth is probably data, right? It's just you're collecting data, but you're not synthesizing it first into understanding, then into wisdom, and finally into the crown, right? It's like that's the whole. That's kind of the whole idea.
Well, my brother and I had this conversation recently where he's like, I don't know, like, should the internet be regulated, kind of vibe, and I'm like, honestly, like, it has to be, because we're at this point that, like, some mentally ill person can come out of the woodwork, with an anime character as their avatar and ruin somebody's life, and all kinds of horrible things can be done. And all sorts of damage is being done to our hormones and to our, as you're saying, with between Dath and Kether and all this Kabbalistic concepts, all sorts of stuff is being, all sorts of new distractions and new Qliphothic forces are being kind of hurled at us with this thing, because it happened so fast, and it moved a lot faster than we could figure it out, and and I'm like, the same way that we, that there are regulations on a corporation who's spilling toxic waste everywhere, and you're like, sorry, you can't fucking do that, right? That's what needs, eventually it's got to happen, because there's too much toxic waste. The internet as one giant amoebic thing is a dangerous thing. And then a couple hours later, we were on a long drive, my brother and I. Then we start listening to Joe Rogan podcast with Elon Musk on there, and they said the same thing. They even used the toxic waste metaphor.
Yeah, I agree that there's a lot of toxic waste, although I respectfully disagree, because I'm a free speech purist and I'm an old school internet hacker dude, and and this is why. I agree that random people and trolls being able to fuck with people online is a problem, but I am way more concerned about state actors and corporate actors having control over our ability to communicate. And I think that governments are and corporations, and at this point there's really no difference, are far more dangerous than some guy in their parents' basement. And a lot of people make the argument now that, well, for instance, Twitter, Facebook are private companies, so they should be able to do whatever they want. Well, in theory, but the reality is that they get tons of government subsidies, and they were often set up by the military or with government funding in the first place. And on the flip side, they're more powerful than governments now, and they're able to influence who they want in office with soft power, with money, and also with hard censorship of data, manipulation of search results, manipulation of social media algorithms. And I really think that the true issue of our time is not what people can say on the internet, but it's the fact that corporations have ascended up the totem pole beyond the nation state, and that we're in there. So, so in a sense, that might actually be an argument perhaps for government control of corporations, but the problem is that there's just it's a porous boundary between the two things, and there's a revolving door. And it's interesting that you mentioned also, like these things are we know these things are messing with our heads, they're messing with our hormones. And, famously, Silicon Valley people do not let their kids use phones and things like that because they know what they're doing to them. But therefore, so should these companies therefore have the ability to regulate what we think and consume if they're by definition creating a toxic product? I don't think so. And I would like to say that the government can be trusted to regulate, and perhaps should even break up tech monopolies, because now the other thing is we've, to all intents and purposes, lost the First Amendment. When you have, I am certainly no fan of Trump, nor am I a Trump apologist, but when you just objectively look at the situation of there's a private company with the power to effectively mute the president of the most powerful country on the planet, regardless of the personalities involved, that's quite a flex.
Yeah, right? No, I agree.
Yeah.
I'm with you there, and I'm a proponent of free speech as well. Do you know what I mean? I don't think that I don't know. There was a thing recently. I think it was Simon & Schuster was going to publish Mike Pence autobiography or something, and all these people were up in arms about it. And I'm like, dude, you can't silence that. Like, what kind of world would it be if we didn't let that book come out? You know what I mean? It's like, or you're going to fuck with Simon & Schuster. That's like Stalin shit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Or when they censored that New York Post article about Hunter Biden's laptop, it's like, it's not the New York Times, but it's the New York Post. I mean, it's an actual newspaper. You can't just like scrub that off the internet.
Yeah, it's sketchy for sure. But honestly, that's why I'm happy to be a magician, because because it's like that's my home base. You know what I mean? I mean, I've got an Instagram, but I don't have a Twitter. I don't use a Facebook unless I'm taking a class, and I use it for that. But like, because that's because I believe in love and I believe in magic, and like the time I spend with like the people I love, and the time I spend with the magic that I do and what really excites my soul and stuff like that. I mean, I'm not saying that like sexy pictures don't excite my soul, because they do, but you know what I mean? They're different layers, right? There's pleasure and there's bliss,
So
and
sexy
at the end of
pictures is the latter.
I'm sorry?
So sexy pictures on the internet is the latter.
I don't know. I mean, for me, bliss is just like nerding out about planetary magic. You know what I mean? I'm flying to LA to make an astrological talisman with my friend Zumi, and I'm just like obsessed with it. The idea, I was practicing my engraving earlier, and then I get to interview Christina Engelhardt about contacting aliens with Fellini, and that's my bread and butter. You know what I mean? I'm grateful all the years I've known you to have been just as obsessed with this stuff as I've ever been, and just as in love with it and all that. I feel really lucky, and I think it's a refuge. I think one of the reasons why magic is blowing up right now one of the reasons, the magical egregore is unveiling its lotus flower to us right now, is because we are living in this chaotic, dark, qliphothic, storm. So it's like, all right, we have something to like focus us back, focus us back on our origins and our and our powers that are, as you said before, timeless, and our symbols that are timeless, and not merely the vicissitudes of our time.
That's so well put and beautiful, and that's 100% why I do what I do, and I think that. And it's true. It's like magic really allows you that refuge is a great word. It makes me think of the Buddhist thing, taking refuge, the Tibetan thing, but it really is and you take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, which extrapolated means eternal, timeless truth, the path and following the path, and the Sangha, which is all the people that on the same path. Right. It's like we're Sangha. It's like all the people we know. And the Sangha keeps getting bigger. And as long as it's sincere people, well, if they're not sincere, they can't be part of it. Not because it's exclusive, but it's just they won't have the frequency to get in. And I think that what could be better in a way, particularly at a time like this? Magic, no matter how many jams I've got myself into my life or how hopeless it seemed, magic's always there, and it's always been there for me. And even when I felt that it wasn't me doing it, and I think that, and I'm sure you would agree, it's like no matter how bad things seem, if you just sit down and do some meditation and ritual, it's like you can be right back in it.
Oh yeah, and I mean, and that's the thing. It's like suffering. Like I look back on all these times in my life that I've been so magically prolific, I guess. And then I tend to be artistically prolific around the same times. And they, magic and art kind of go hand in hand for me. And I'm like, man, what an amazing time. That was so rich. And I'm like, yeah, but I was actually suffering a lot. And that's what kind of like drove me there. Like I had a heartbreak, right? Or I had a tragedy or something that like forced me into this zone that I was like, I must take everything I have to like we were talking before about alchemy and sublimation, right? To at least like channel this into something meaningful that I know it's going towards an evolutionary purpose. And I know it's going towards something that is truly for my growth. Kind of like the analogy you made earlier about, the car accident that happened that led on to somebody's success later on. Art, using magic in an artistic form has always been a way for me to feel more secure in that. It's always given me a way to be like, okay, now I know. Now I have channeled this into something tangible and visible and alive, and it will always be here. It's a stamp that I've made on time, like you said. And the most beautiful things sometimes come out of the most tormenting stuff and the most painful stuff. And it's not really about avoiding pain, I don't think, as much as it is about taking refuge in what we can do with that pain, and what it should be channeled toward, because a lot of this stuff, a lot of the sexy pictures and all that stuff, they're painkillers. That's what we
narcotics.
That's what we do to avoid pain.
Yep.
And I think it's when we're like avoiding the pain that we run into the trouble. And when we kind of like face it head on and engage with it and interact with it, right? Like make love with it, make peace with it, make art with it, make something with it. Then we've done something, right? Yeah. Then we're not riding the wave anymore.
Yeah. So. The magician confronts the dragon.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, so yeah, that always makes me think of, the Vyov formula, Crowley's Vyov formula.
I don't.
So this was such an important concept for me. So, so Crowley talks about the EAO. Well, now I'm doing the ritual. He talks about the IAO formula, right? So it's Isis, Apophis, Osiris, which, and just about everyone knows in Hermetic magic, but for those who don't know, is the formula of the dying god, right? So you have Isis, who is then torn apart by Apophis, who is then resurrected, or Osiris. It means Osiris is slain and then resurrected. And it's the story of Christ. It's the story of the wheat field, the wheat dying and then coming back. It's the story of the sun dying. And it's the story of every single movie you see where the hero, is, almost gives up and then finds the strength within themselves to triumph at the end. They lose everything and then are resurrected, right? So it's the hero's journey. Right. It's like the core story baked, the Kingmaker story, the story baked into Western civilization. And it's also the male orgasmic curve. Right. So obviously, and hence all these ideas about agriculture and solar cycles and patriarchal control and all of this stuff. And then so Crowley says that in the Aeon of Horus, the Aeon of the ever-borning child, the formula is Vyov. So it has a vow on either side. And long story short, what he says is, in the new Aeon, obviously the new Aeon abrogates this old idea of the necessity of suffering, right? That you must be crucified and resurrected and purified through suffering, and that therefore suffering is, in a sense, the meaning of life and all that Jordan Peterson stuff, right? So Crowley says that you still go through, but it's constantly repeating and fractal, in the sense that instead of going through this monolithic hero's journey, death and resurrection show, instead, you're constantly going through this on purpose in order to learn. Meaning, and so what the V's represent, or the vowels on either side represent, is your core nature, right? So the idea is, from an enlightened perspective, you never change. The Atman is always the same. Whatever that core storm center of consciousness is, whatever that is, it never actually changes. Everything else is the vicissitudes of Maya. So the idea is that, you start from the perspective of unbroken awareness, enter the IAO formula. You go through this drama, this ritual drama of, which means any life experience or anything you do, a new job, a new relationship, and whatever, a new artistic project, a new house, whatever it might happen to be. You go through the time cycle of it, the thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, and then you come out on the other end of it. And because you're coming from enlightened consciousness, nothing's changed. You understand that you're the same Atman, you're the same core enlightened consciousness that you were going into it. So you haven't become spiritually dignified through this process. You haven't attained some new spiritual state, because you were always the same consciousness, but you've just done this in order to learn something or express something to yourself. And he says that the whole point of the Aeon of Horus is that since you're the ever-growing child, instead of the dying and resurrected God, you're just going through these experiences over and over again to have more fun. It's like playing with toys, to have more fun experiences, to learn more about yourself, to just grow. And I think that's such a beautiful concept and so important for people to understand. In a sense, that is the formula of the new Aeon, or a real key to it. And without that, then life becomes play, because you understand that you can't change your fundamental spiritual state. You're just awareness. But you could apply it to multiple lifetimes, whatever you want to apply it to. So it's just this, as Crowley puts it, the formula of the Aeon of Horus is the jet turbine compared to the Model T or something like that. And it's like, yeah, you're just like at play with the universe, going through all these experiences, and you don't really change. Nothing ever changes. And that takes out that core awareness. That could be Vedic awareness. It doesn't have to be thelemic. Buddhist Dzogchen might say the same thing, but it takes the heavy, the heavy importance of your life experiences out. It takes the weight out. It takes the Jordan Peterson, like everything is suffering out, and just turns it into I'm doing this for fun. It's like endlessly entertaining experiences, or Leela, right?
Yeah, or I'm doing it for opera, like we were saying earlier, like the drama of life, like with a capital D. It's like no one's going to buy tickets to the movie if there's no heartbreak, if there's no conflict, if there's no tragedy. It's like that's what we love it. You know what I mean?
Capital D, the capital D.
Yeah, it's like we love it, because that's what's worth writing about, like that's what's worth telling a story about, is some kind of trial, and it's all over astrology. The sun rises and sets, the moon waxes and wanes. Every single planet has its, conjunction with the sun, where it is burned in that solar crucible and then reborn in a new phase of its cycle. This is, it's all part of life,
Absolutely. And it's not just that it's worth representing through art. It's just that it's worth living. It's fun to live,
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, even when it's not fun, like at least it happened to you, like at least,
at least every day above ground's a good day, Mickey.
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
totally. Okay. Well, let me ask you a couple questions. One is, if people want to I feel behind now on astrology. Damn, you just laid some knowledge down. So if people want to learn more about astrology from a real precise angle and a way that they can really begin to apply it to their life, and not necessarily to become professional astrologers, but to really get a handle on it, what resources would you recommend to them?
I'm a big fan of Demetra George and her books on astrology. I think that they're really good textbooks. I think that Chris Brennan's book, Hellenistic Astrology, is a really great way to start. And I think that Chris Brennan's astrology podcast is a really wonderful resource for people. My teacher's on it once a month. It's a really... but as far as books, and that aren't too heady, I don't know if that's been written yet, really. The book to really get started on. I mean, the best thing to do is really to see a good astrologer, I think. But the work of Demetra George and Chris Brennan and the stuff he's doing on his podcast, I think, are a really great place to start.
I will just throw in the absolute best book I ever read about astrology. I swear, and this isn't a wind up. The best book I ever read was The Idiot's Guide to Astrology. It was really good. Same with Hindu. You can learn a lot from. I love those books. Yeah, I learned a lot from that.
But there's been a lot of innovations in astrology in the past 20 years, and when I say innovations, I mean ancient material that's been uncovered and that's really made astrology become much more sophisticated and much more thorough, and I would say much more practical to our daily lives and not just our psychological condition. So as far as what's really going on now, I don't know if that idiot book would be relevant anymore.
Okay, fair enough. I'm a noob.
But it can't hurt. Look, anything that you get your hands on. I'm a firm believer that books are like angels. They come into your life when you need them. They come into your life when you're ready for them, and that's where you go. And also 36 Faces, the book on the decans of the zodiac. Maybe it's a little advanced, but I know that it's coming out with a new edition soon. So that's a great place to start. And honestly, my start too was really Hermetic magic. I mean, it folds into it, astrology folds into that stuff. So, learning about astrology, how it pertains to magic, all that. It's all integrated, I think.
What do you think about sidereal versus tropical? I know that's a fairly controversial one, but at least when my perception of it was that sidereal is the only accurate one. But I'm curious what your thoughts are.
I'm a tropical astrologer.
Okay.
My view, I see I see the value of sidereal astrology, and I do use it sometimes. Like, for example, if I'm dealing with fixed stars or something like that, I'm not going to use tropical astrology. I'm going to use sidereal astrology because I'm dealing with the actual star in that situation. But do you mind if I don't go too far into what?
Yes.
Like,
that's fine.
I use tropical astrology, but I see the virtues of sidereal astrology, and I believe that they can both. There's room on the broom.
I like that. That's a good phrase. That's a good phrase for so many things. I remember that.
Frank Haynes, actually, Witch Hotline. I stole that from him. He's like,
damn.
Whenever if I'm going to a party or something, he's like, is there room on the broom? Like
that phrase could just defuse a lot of stuff right off the bat. I like that.
Yeah,
remember that.
It's like we can all think differently. We can all use a different zodiac. There's room on the broom.
I love it. I love it. So we talked about Time Lord, but how can people find out more about you and your work and everything you are up to?
I got a website and an Instagram. I don't update the website that much, but MickeyPellerano.com and Mickey Pellerano on Instagram, and Time Lord TV. You can catch us every month on YouTube. So
awesome. Well, that was amazing. We should do it again soon. And,
that was so much fun. We haven't even talked as friends in so long. So just to be on a podcast right away.
Well, I saw you in London 3 years ago or something, but.
Oh yeah, the Serpentine thing. That was awesome.
Yeah. That was random.
Yeah, that was the last time I saw you.
Well, we got to catch up. All right.
We will. And thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk with you about these things.
The pleasure is all mine. And we should definitely have another one soon because these are always great ones. All right.
100%.
All right. Hope you really enjoyed that. Don't forget to join us on Monday, Memorial Day, May 31st, for our 2021 World Summit, Magic.me World Summit. Anyone who is a paid Magic.me user of any product, any class at any tier is invited. So if you're not already subscribed, go ahead and subscribe. It's going to be great. I will see you there. 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and you will get an email with login details if you are a paid student. In the meantime, till next time, I will see you in class, and hang in there. Be good. Lots of love. See you next time.